Hello, everyone. I'm Mystery.
And I'm Mortimer the Authenticator, and we are the Duality of Man. I I pushed for doing this episode on the basis that something didn't sit right with me about the reaction to the guy what self-immolated over essentially Antifa reasons. And it also sort of in my head segued into talking about male disposability, which I don't think we have talked about before on stream. And I mean, what is a more crystallized and, overt and permanent example of male disposability other than martyrdom? And yes, there are female martyrs too, but the thing is, even the female martyrs that there are, and it is, less represented than male martyrs. A lot of the female martyrs tend to survive. They just happen to go through some unspeakable torture type thing, which is bad in and of itself, don't get me wrong, but at least at least a sizable chunk of the alleged female martyrs have a tendency to, survive it, whereas the male martyrs are almost never so lucky.
True, true. But in regards to today's topic, I think that liberals, or what we used to understand as liberals, have I, it's kind of been a bit hollowed out. If you understand what I mean, it. I think the vast majority of people who would describe themselves as liberals in the past few decades, in previous decades, have been basically like just devoured by progressivism.
Or let's call things what they are and just say neo-Hegelianism, because that's what it is. And no, I'm not calling it Marxism, because that would be giving Marx too much credit. Marx was an unoriginal hack, and his only major innovation to the neo-Hegelian framework was focusing in on economics in relation to the whole thesis antithesis dichotomy. So the main reason I don't call things, cultural Marxism or anything is because it's historically illiterate, and it gives a trust fund brat from the 19th century way too much credit for being an original hack.
So
'Cause that is a funny thing about Marx. If you ever actually look into his personal history, it's not just the modern trust fund brats that have a tendency to adhere to Marxism and its various variants or precursors. The original patient zero of Marxism was definitely a case of trust fund brat with more time on his hands and more resources than sense.
yeah, I remember a letter from Marx's father basically calling him a wastrel that threw away his fiance like every opportunity that was ever presented with him.
Have not you been given everything you have ever reasonably wanted? Has not nature endowed you with extraordinary gifts, and yet you comport yourself in this manner? Something along those lines. And it's like,
Yeah,
if I had a penny for every rich trust fund brat with basically that same ethos behind them, I would have a lot of fucking money.
speaking of rich trust fund bats, despite Marx's status, what he wanted to appeal to was the working class of society. And it just seems kind of hilarious that now, in today's age, many liberals in the left wing have greatly abandoned the working class in some sort of, you know, ill informed, like pseudo intellectual belief that they need them to guide them because they are not smart enough to make their own decisions, certainly not smart
Well,
enough
okay,
to
here's
make
the
decisions
here's
about the
the
direction of the country.
here's the catch 22 that we're in, and this has always been a thing. The neo-Hegelian set, which again I call it because giving Marx too much credit for being an unoriginal hack annoys me. Um, the neo-Hegelian set want to appeal to the ethos of the working class in the form of a like ideological preconception, an ideological construct, a platonic form, if you will, but they hate and revile in every facet the actual working class because in the cold light of reality, the actual ethos that underpins the actual working class rather than just the, capital W, capital C working class TM is usually a libertarian, individualistic, and populist one. And as we have seen in stark relief in recent years, that's that's not allowed according to the academic preconception of what the working class TM should be.
Yeah, it's like they've
It is
made an idol
forbidden,
out of. It's like they've made an
hardcore
idol
forbidden.
out of the working class, and then recoil in horror when faced with the reality.
Because let's be real, in the modern day, in speaking of the cold light of reality, in the modern day, the average working class dude or dudette is a Trump supporter, probably with libertarian or Randian objectivist tendencies.
Yeah, because y- that's one of the things that
Not
I
to
don't
mention the
understand
straight out
about.
ANCAPs, but yeah, also them.
That's one of the things I don't understand regarding liberals from say 10, 15 years ago to liberals today. Like they were in the past, they were much more like you know anti-war, like small government. Um, you know, peel back all of the bullshit spending.
Libertarian.
Yeah, but now it just
Yeah.
seems that they are all for, government control, giving the government, more power and, spend however much they freaking want. And it really the average working class guy just it doesn't they don't need or want the government to solve all their problems because first off, the government almost makes everything worse whenever they get involved. And two, because, you know, they they believe that they're capable of solving their own problems if only the government would just get things out of the way.
Yeah. The reason being is back in the day, the like ethos that ran society was the like hardcore tradcon family values, Helen Lovejoy, Jack Thompson, Frederick Wortham sort of mindset. Um, and so those of a libertarian bent who didn't like the moral authoritarianism of said, family values tradcons wound up siding with the left because the left was the one advocating for, hey, this is tyrannical, hey, this is authoritarian, get fucked. Um, Whereas now, the left, the social justice, neo Hegelian, post Frankfurt School left, is the dominant zeitgeist, is the new moral order, if you like. And so, a lot of the people back in the day apparently were not as principled as they looked from the outside. It's a case of when I am weak, I advocate for libertarianism because I am weak. But when I am the one sitting on the golden throne, then obviously norms and authority and institutions and blah and blah and blah are sacrosanct and don't you dare question them
It's a
because
lot
my
like
morality.
it's a lot like Lenin, who railed against the authority of the Russian monarchy and aristocracy, but when he actually gets into power, he's so much worse than they are.
Yeah, I forget what show it was from, but there was this. It might have been a South Park bit. There was a post-apocalyptic scenario where the ruling class had giant helmets as status symbols, and then the like rebels were opposing the rule of the giant helmets. And then the second they won, they all started wearing giant metal helmets again because status symbol. And obviously hashtag not all, because some of us were serious when we said no moral structure should be authoritarianly enforced from top down. Like, and that is true on a large scale, because as you saw, there was quite a schism in the, new atheist movement, um, in and around 2013 or so, when half of the atheism movement went atheism plus, which would include social justice and feminism and everything the fuck else, basically the neo-Hegelian wing of the atheism movement. And then on the other hand, you had the skeptics, or the anti-SJWs, who saw that the SJWs were the new moral authoritarians and opposed them accordingly, because they actually had principles to be consistent with. And then even within the anti-SJW sphere, you eventually saw some people, the alt right, the actual alt right, not the everything I don't like is alt right, um, going, sure, identity politics is bad, but what about white identity politics? And then the rest is history, and we get Richard Spencer and JF Garipy and so on. But yeah,
Yeah,
it
but
very much seems
those
like
guys are gone now.
there is a certain subset of people who will advocate for freedom when they're not getting what they want, but the second they get what they want, it's all special pleading and my shit is better than your shit.
See, there are, as you said, like a great number of similarities between uh, the Christian moralists of like the '90s and early 2000s, and modern day uh, modern day progressive liberal culture. But one thing that I would argue is that I think that today is worse.
I think today is worse because the the tradcon evangelicals of the 80s and 90s were basically the last dying gasp of something that had started, 5 centuries earlier with the, Protestant Reformation. Whereas the SJWs are still, in historical terms, the rising power, the rising order. The Bushite warmongering of the, early 2000s was the last dying gasp of that sort of puritanical inquisitorial mindset on the right. Even today, most of the right, obviously not all, because there's still the occasional Matt Walsh or Gavin McGinnis, um, but most people on the right tend to trend, if I can speak correctly, more populist and or libertarian than they do moralist or evangelical. And I think that's genuinely a good thing, because in my opinion, the part of the political compass that matters is the vertical axis, not the horizontal one. But but
Well, here's
by
the thing.
contrast, the neo-Hegelian wing, um, of the left, the social justice left, um, has mostly been gestating in academia for the last century or so, give or take, and only now has started actually putting its feet forward. The good news is it's so unpalatable and self-defeating that it probably is going to burn itself out, especially if those of us that actually have, libertarian or populist principles, help it along into its grave. But that does explain why it is more extreme than the evangelical tradcon impulse. It's not because they're actually any better than the SJWs. It's because their heyday was 500 years ago during Inquisitions and Protestant Reformation and so on. And so whatever dregs were dragged into the modern day had to go through several world wars and whole new cultural paradigms in order to get here. Whereas the SJWs are just getting going, which is sort of horrifying in a way, but maybe we'll be able to kill it while it's still an infant. Maybe.
Well, one thing that I would say is that even today, when you have your like Matt Walsh types, and Matt Walsh has said uh, many things that I disagree with, it's even from those types, it's usually you should not, where from the social justice left, it's things like we will not allow you to.
Yeah, for now, I think if there is a genuine cultural swing in the other direction, though, you'll get the we'll just ban it impulse back. I think. In the same way as when you had the falling out between the alt right and the anti SJW movement, um, there were a lot of the people who broke away and formed the actual alt right were the sorts of people who went, yes, I came into this movement agreeing that identity politics is bad, but dot dot dot. What about my white identitarianism? And away we go. There will always be people who will advocate for more liberty when they have no power, but the second they have that sweet cultural consensus, all of a sudden I can declare myself dictator and we can morally purify the world.
You know, there's always going to be those people, but much like the alt right, I don't think those people are going to get anywhere. Like the alt right is basically fizzled out.
Yeah, and so much the better. Good fucking riddance. No matter how much the mainstream media tries to fearmonger about them and bring them back to relevance because that's the fight they would rather fight. Um, but I do, I would caution anyone who goes, well, but the TradCon family values era wasn't this bad. It's because you're forgetting the 500 years that preceded it, where it definitely was this bad and worse. So
But
let's not act that because the tradcons were dying in the 90s and 2000s that they are in principle any better. They're just waiting for the wind to change in many ways. And all we can do and should do is make sure the wind stays moving in whatever direction will kill them both. That's where I'm sitting with this. I don't want to bring back being burnt at the stake, mostly because, well, let's be real here. I am one of the primary candidates for that if we ever do go in that direction again. But I also don't want to live in San Angeles from Demolition Man either, which is the direction we will move in if the SJWs end up being able to metastasize any further. So yeah, let's kill the SJWs in their infancy and then not go back to the old ways because that would also be bad.
here's the thing: I don't think this is their infancy, because
In
I feel like
historical terms,
that.
I mean, yes, it kind of is.
Well, in in regards to history, sure. I mean, in regards to history, America is still in its infancy. But what I think about their infancy, I think about when you know they were basically um, metastasizing and spreading basically in secret, where they would spread these ideas subtly throughout universities and get into positions of power in industries in universities, and then all of a sudden they start pushing this more and more and more and more and more on the culture. It's kind of like those insects that will bury underground as larvae and then reappear fully grown. What are they?
Right,
Cicadas?
but to in keeping with the metaphor, in keeping with the the gestation metaphor. I think that was the metaphorical sperm meeting the metaphorical egg and forming a zygote. I think we're still in the infancy stage of where this neo-Hegelian um virus can metastasize to. Which is why I would really prefer that just this once, let's abort the idea. Like, not obviously not the people involved, mind you. I'm not advocating for anything like that, but certainly in the metaphorical sense about which we can abort an idea. Let's abort the idea while it's still young enough to be killed, rather than
Well,
letting it metastasize, and then because again, defaulting back to sort of historical terms, do you really want to see where social justice might wind up in the next 500 years or so? Get, or 1,000 if we're again making the comparison to the like hardcore evangelical, like puritanical inquisitorialness. Like, if this is the equivalent of Rome just after Constantine converted everybody, I don't want to live to see, or I don't want my descendants to live to see when the SJWs finally start getting their hands dirty and actually start, you know, making inquisitions.
well, they've already done that kind of in a way in areas where they hold a lot of sway, like in Portland.
Yeah, but it's still defang compared to what it might be in a century or two. I don't want us to
You
get
think
there in the first place, mind you, but
you think, you think they're gonna go full gulag?
I think genuinely, if this neo-Hegelian virus, which I again, one of the reasons I call it that is because it is very important to remind ourselves that Marx was not the instigator of this; it was Hegel. And if this neo-Hegelian virus is allowed to um, metastasize for another 200 or 300 years, I think the gulags will look like a fucking daycare by comparison. Like, we are talking about a level of human misery that I don't even think can be conceived of in the modern Western mind. Look look at look at the way the Muslims still kind of are in the, sort of quasi medieval Christian mindset. Well, what is the SJW equivalent of a goddamn suicide bomber going to look like? What is social justice Sharia going to look like in 200 or 300 years? I don't want to know, and I don't want anyone who is a human to ever have to know. But I can conceive of a situation much, much worse than we are sitting in now. Which is why I think we should do our best to kill it, or at least stymie it as much as possible from getting to that point. Because if we wind up actually going through a similar kind of conversion phase that Rome went through once it converted to Christianity, and then when it converted the Celts and the Germans and so on, um, if social justice becomes our new guiding morality, then come back in 500 to 1,000 years, and the world will just be a scorched mess, frankly.
I don't think it's ever going to get that far because the reality is that when these people actually have authority, like they're incompetent, like genuinely incompetent.
Yeah, their
Like
their their capacity for self-sabotaging and infighting is one of the, I guess, saving graces um this of their malignancy. Still,
you
a
see it
lot
at
of the
almost
a lot
every
of
level.
the like wackier Christian sects were also self-sabotaging to the point of collapsing civilizations. So let's not act like that is necessarily a magic bullet.
Well, but the thing is, like, look. when they actually have control. Look at the things they do. Like for example, you remember the president of Harvard got called out for one not refusing to condemn calls for violence against Jewish people, and then also
Literal
for being a
anti-Semitism
blatant.
among the academics and students of Harvard. Of how
Yeah,
far the
and
mighty have
then
fallen.
and then it found out that much of her academic work was plagiarized, quite blatantly plagiarized at that. Then you also have other figures in politics. Did you see the clip of Alexandria Ocasio Cortez saying that RICO is not a crime?
What?
Well, you didn't see this. It was all over the internet.
I did not. In my defense, normally whenever I see anything related to AOC, I avoid it on principle just because of the sheer cringe.
I usually do it too, but I actually saw the title before I clicked away from it, so I watched it. And yeah, she was arguing with this witness in I believe they were testifying regarding the Trump RICO thing before Congress, and she just started. No, it was not it was Trump. It was Hunter Biden. It was a Hunter Biden case testifying in Congress, and this guy starts attempting to list the things that he saw and witnessed in regards to Hunter Biden's obvious corruption, and she just starts yelling at him and interrupting him and says like RICO is not a crime. Which I mean, if RICO is not a crime, then that means Donald Trump is innocent and he should walk free.
Uh, but I oh that woman that woman just
Yeah, like I said, they're incompetent.
I I can't with that. I know, but think of all of the incompetent priests that existed during the Dark Ages. Didn't stop the church for having a stranglehold over most of Europe for
That's
almost a
actually
thousand
there's
years.
actually a very funny joke about that. Do you want to know how the church is divinely inspired?
Go on. I couldn't possibly guess.
Because no organization made by man so incompetently run would last a fortnight.
I mean, point, but yeah, I uh, I just like for all of the many faults of social justice in the current mold, um, we are still in a parallel situation to Rome before its fall. We're circling the drain of the fall, but we are still in the Rome before its fall phase. And if a similar collapse happens when we transition to uh, converting to social justice, like we did when we converted from Roman polytheism to Roman Catholicism, um, then that means that the next quote unquote church is going to be a social justice oriented one, and eek, like entire generations just cringed right from their graves as I said that. I'm sure.
Well, I also here's the thing. Here's another thing that I don't believe that it will get backfired because these people can only possibly exist in the comfort and security that is the Western world. If things were to collapse and times got genuinely hard, and the barbarians were as they are appeared to be right now at the gates. If things were to actually
Well, in
fall,
fairness,
it was
they
going to
were
be
largely invited both from U.S. Immigration policy and from Europe's "come all ye migrants" approach.
yeah. But the thing is, like, if the security of the United States were to eventually fail, and these people had to secure themselves, all of this ideology would collapse pretty quickly.
I hope you're right, but the thing is, I could see it just becoming a more overtly mask off version of itself. um, to cope with said hard times, and that would once again lead us back to a Dark Ages equivalent here.
Well, you see what they tried to do when they tried to create that mini society in the what was it, the Chaz Chop back in 2020, and that was one again incompetently run, and also descended into violence and anarchy very very quickly. And these ideas aren't conducive to survival in a secure society. God only knows what'll happen to them when they're in an insecure one.
Right, but it only takes one Stalin or one Hitler or one Mao to rally around to make everyone simultaneously agree with the framework and fall in line because threat of force. So all that means is that the Raz Simones of the world have a better shot at running the social justice dark ages than do the Anita Sarkeesians and Lacey Greens. I don't think that's necessarily a better scenario, though. That's just a slightly more cohesive version. Although that cohesiveness was born out of "agree with me or I'll shoot you," which ick.
Well, that is possible to happen, but I think what's more likely to happen is that a lot of the people in this country, the vast majority of people in this country, don't like these people at all, and are basically forced to put up with them based because of the limits placed on them by our society, such as rule of law, the justice system, and if those things were to collapse, do you think that people would just still put up with them as restrained as they have been?
It depends on when it happens. If our society continues along its path to, you know, the new religious conversion that is social justice, um, even the opposition might not know any better but to be the opposition. So, like, for example, once you again comparing the conversion to Christianity in the prelude to the fall of the Roman Empire. Once you accept that those suppositions are true, once you accept that there is, but one God and salvation and all the original sin and all this stuff, it doesn't particularly matter that you don't like it or that your grandparents' generation were very happy being polytheists because that is the new framework that everyone adheres to. And if they can convince enough of society that this is normal, that this is the new framework, some version of it will remain. It might be altered or mitigated somewhat by the need for a strongman dictator, but sooner or later, if the conversion process is allowed to linger long enough, people are going to start regarding the previous, classically liberal, secularist, pluralist order in the same way that your average Christian in the Dark Ages regarded the pagan past.
Well, here's the thing. I think that the conversion is beginning to faltering because I don't know if you've seen the charts, but a lot of the in the generations like Gen Z and some of the older members of Gen Alpha are really beginning to reject this kind of thing, especially young men, because what young men are discovering is that this ideology has literally nothing to offer them except constant beatings for
Self-loathing,
being
self-hatred,
men.
and the irrepressible yoke of effectively the new original sin.
Yeah, so I don't believe they're going to be sucked into this because there's nothing for them there.
And that does give me hope, and I hope you're right. I'm just saying that there, like, let's not act as though we don't have. Let's not act as though there is no lose state here. Like, it is possible that we can lose. It is possible that something akin to the conversion from paganism to Christianity will happen and that the new church will be a social justice oriented one. Uh, I don't want that to happen. I really desperately hope it doesn't happen. But given the parallels between the crazier fringes of fundamentalist Christianity, or, even more so with fundamentalist Islam, and what is currently going on with social justice, and given the parallels between the conversion of Rome from paganism to Christianity and the conversion of our modern society from a classically liberal or classically libertarian secular pluralist order to a neo-Hegelian one, um, I worry that th- by the time they're done with their infiltration and conversion, the next generation simply will not know what the world looks like without social justice, in the same way that a peasant from the Dark Ages simply does not know what life was like before the advent of monotheism, let alone have any positive regard for it. Because again, compare the way your average rank and file Christian viewed the quote unquote pagan past, or was forced to by church doctrine, and how the social justice warriors, very much even so now, are starting to insist that people view the liberal past. It's a concerning series of parallels, is all I'm saying, and I don't like
One thing,
it's not written in stone. It's not fatalistically inevitable, because I'm not a fucking neo-Hegelian, and I don't believe that history is one directional. But the variables are there that could make this a very, very bad situation, historically speaking.
well, one advantage that I think that we have over the past is records. I mean, the average peasant back in the Middle Ages could not read, and obviously, people can read now, and also we have, books like from decades ago, hundreds of years ago. We have, music. We have, video. We have, these things to show us exactly what the world was like previously.
That is true, and again, that is cause for hope. But especially with the Western science is oppressive. Western science is a tool of the patriarchy. Western science is a tool of colonialism and imperialism and all that. Given that framework, and especially given the infiltration into the educational system of social justice, um, we might lose that technology by virtue of a simple dumbing down of the populace. Because one thing we've noticed in modern day academia, especially, is where once the top 1% of 1% of 1% of intellects were the people who gave us academia, now academia is stocked from floor to ceiling with a bunch of midwits for the most part. And some of that is simply by virtue of um, diversity credentials and so on, and affirmative action. But some of that is simply the result of, once you agree to an ideology like social justice, once you have been convinced to agree to it, the ideology itself is stupefying. Literally, it makes you dumber. It makes you less able to see beyond false dichotomies. It makes you less able to not view things in oppressor and oppressed dichotomies. And how many generations of that will it take before someone literally goes, well, if technology and science are affectations of imperialism and colonialism and the Western patriarchy, why don't we just shut it all off? It's not as if it's benefiting us in any way, especially with the advent of things like AI making fake videos a thing. And I'm not one of those people who fear mongers about AI, but in the
No,
hands
that's me.
of the social justice inquisition, if they needed a propagandistic way to quote unquote prove everything they say about the patriarchy and about history is true, it would be a spectacular tool for them to manufacture such things if they wanted to.
Well, regarding your fear of the dumbing down of society, um I do think colleges do make people dumber nowadays, except for if you're going into like certain fields, like maybe like medicine or law, because like
The
you're just going to
trades,
need to
yeah.
know. Yeah, yeah, but I feel like, and I've actually seen a lot of people no longer regard college with the prestige that it used to have. Like, for example, when all those colleges were, in front of Congress when they failed to call out anti-Semitism on their campuses, a lot of companies said we are no longer going to hire people who come from these schools, and a lot of students said, I am no longer going to apply to these schools because they've shown themselves to be
Yeah,
exactly what we now know them
they're
to
not
be.
fit for purpose. The current establishment is not fit for purpose.
Not only that, but like we now have the numbers of mass people going into colleges for degrees in like sociology or criminal psychology, and a lot of those people are just getting jobs at like Starbucks and shit. So I feel like you're going to see a lot more people go into things like trades now, because while studying those ideas and those subject matters might be interesting, the trades are always going to have a tangible
Yeah, you're
use in
always
the
going to
world.
need plumbers and electricians and yada 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 and woodworkers and so on. And that also gives me hope, especially because it does seem to be coming from a generally populist, generally libertarian, simultaneously instinct of the current norms and institutions are not fit for purpose, so fuck them. Um,
I i i feel that things are turning around, and well, yes, they could go in a bad direction. I feel like we will be able to turn things around before we go over the edge.
yes, and I lean in that direction too because I generally think that libertarian-minded people, populist-minded and or populist-minded people tend to outmaneuver and outthink and outwit bloated geriatric establishment norm mongers. But just so that we're not entirely, blinding ourselves with white pills here, there is a there is a Christmas Carol style "should these shadows remain unaltered by the future" sort of asterisk behind the optimism. Like,
Yeah,
yes, we
like
can
I think.
win. Yes, we can kill social justice while it's still mostly in its infancy. Yes, we can shun both the tradcons and the HAWs simultaneously and not collapse civilization. There is also a possibility that if we don't do that, if we don't align with a populist and or libertarian ethos, but quick, um, the dark ages that will descend upon us will make the previous dark ages look like a fucking golden age.
Now, while I am mostly very positive, I think one of the key factors to being able to kill this ideology, like genuinely, I think one of the key factors would be the reelection of Donald Trump. I think that would be very important for turning these things around. And one of the things that I fear is that the neo Hegelians and ideologues in power within the government are going to try and muck things up so that doesn't happen.
Yep, that is also true, especially in the context of Milei getting elected in Argentina and I forget his name from El Salvador. Um, the
Kelly?
one that was just like, well, if you're going to identify yourselves to me, then I'm definitely going to do something to you. That one.
Hold on. I'll look up his name because he is great. And actually, I think we should do a video talking more about him, because I think that he is going to end up in the future being looked at as one of the great men of history for El Salvador.
I hope that at some point, um, and he does seem to be trending this way. I hope that at some point killing all the kingpins is not going to be his only selling point, and he does seem to want other policy goals as well. It's just I do get a little
Uh,
bit cagey when explicit force becomes the order of the day. Um,
it's Bukele, and arresting all the criminals isn't just his only thing. Like he's also turned things around economically for El Salvador. He's improving their economics. I think he's trying to you know he's attempting to tie the El Salvadoran currency closer to Bitcoin. So like instead of a gold standard, he's trying to create a Bitcoin standard.
and honestly, the best case for all of South America at this point would be a very strong, very partnered alliance between Malay and Bukele, especially if Trump gets reelected. Because what I would really like to see is this sort of populist stroke libertarian ethos being reflected in as many countries as they possibly can be. Um, so Trump in America, Milei in Argentina, um, Bukele in El Salvador, and so on. Bukele is probably the least likable of the three, in my opinion, because of the and I get that things were that fucked that he did need to go for the explicit force, but someone should be very careful about monitoring how he uses that because I don't want another Muammar Gaddafi situation. Um, so yeah,
Uh,
of the three, I think I might like Malay the best, and then Trump, and then Bukele.
well, the thing about you know these guys turning situations down in South America, like much like in North America, like then South America obviously was in a much worse situation than the United States is, but like it just required people with the will to actually see the problems fixed. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, we don't really have that in America, except for maybe a handful of people.
Yeah, as I've often said, there are 5 to 7 politicians, maybe in all of the U.S.'s establishment that I actually would consider worthy of voting for, and literally everyone else needs to be GTFO'd, especially the geriatrics, because God damn it, we need to put an age cap in running, just like we put a minimum age on of I believe 35. We need to start putting in an age cap. If you're if you're above if you're more than 10 years above the US's retirement age, you should not be in a high stress, high power job like a politician.
I would even say that once you reach the retirement age,
I'm willing to extend it to 75 just because I do think there are enough people um older than 65 with their heads on straight that I don't want to necessarily prevent them. But yeah, over 75 though, I think should be the cap.
I think one interesting thing um, would be that Congress is only paid when they are in session. So you don't have these people collecting a salary and then just doing
Yeah, the
fuck all.
income. Yeah, fuck the passive income.
I think also the thing it would.
Do your job or GTFO is the also
I think also well, one
also
thing it would do is that hold on, let me just finish here real quick. I think that if we didn't pay them while Congress wasn't in session, I feel like it would also force them to get normal jobs, and also if they got normal jobs, it would tie them closer to the issues that are actually
and
affecting
the people
people
they're
in the
supposed to
country.
actually be representative, yeah, of yeah,
Yeah.
at least in theory. Um, Also, I think. that just like the U.S. president has a limit to the number of terms he can run in addition to term limits, I think every Congress position also should have a limit of terms as well as a term limit.
What would you put the term limit for Congress as? They get elected every 3 years, right? So what about 12 years for Congress?
I would be a little bit more strict than that. I would say I believe it's every 2 years, isn't it? I thought it was every 2 years that Congress
So
gets.
I think it like switches on and off where some is up 1 year and some are up the next. So I don't think all of Congress is being
Okay,
constantly
so yeah, I
reelected.
would put Congress in at like 6 years or 8 years. Like I see no reason why the president and Congress shouldn't be as close to the same as it can be. The only exception then would be if, for example, someone was a congressperson and they wanted to run for president, they could do that. Like you could do your 2 or 3 terms as a congressperson and then also run for president. So that would be 10 to 12 years service full stop. Um, but I wouldn't allow for it any more than that. I don't think.
I think um, I think another idea I had for as a way to help turn Congress around that this I understand that this idea will never happen, not in 1,000 years, but it would be a congressional draft, like a military draft, where you get a letter in the mail saying you have been drafted to serve in the United States Congress for such and such district or represent such and such state in the Senate. And then you go in, you do your time, you get out, and then once you're done, you cannot be drafted for Congress or Senate again.
That would be an option. I forget what other option I was going to suggest. I had an idea and I lost it. Um,
Hey, when that happens.
oh yes, now I remember. I think we should take a page out of most of Europe's book and institute the idea of a vote of no confidence, because it is frankly farcical to me that Congress, in terms of approval rating, can't even get a passing grade. Like I understand that everyone's always going to want different things from different people and so on and so forth. So like you're never going to get up into the 80s or 90s reasonably, or even if you do, that's going to be very rare and very difficult to maintain. So I'm not going to be that strict, but if I, as a high schooler or as a college student, had to get a 70 or a 65 or whatever the fuck to get a passing grade, then I sure as shit expect that from the the people we lavish money and power upon like it's going out of style. Like
Yeah, well, that's
that would be the standard. It's like if the approval rating of Congress dips below a passing grade, then the possibility of a vote of no confidence should exist.
now. Would you have that be like on an individual basis where people vote no confidence for their current representative, or would that be for Congress as a whole?
Um, I would say options for either, but I think the first one would probably have to be rarer than the second one. I would probably lean more on the vote of no confidence for Congress as a whole. That way we could essentially hashtag drain the swamp as and when the swamp needs to be drained, rather than doing it piecemeal.
Now, let me ask you something. What do you think that would be a good idea to deal with bureaucrats? Because a lot of people will get appointed to government positions and then just stay between administrations.
Um, I'm gonna borrow a page from Razor Fist book here and say that especially the judicial system should probably have term limits as well. The idea of you basically get asked to be a Supreme Court judge by whosoever the fuck when they were president, and you basically stay in that position until you either die or retire. Nah, fuck that noise. That being said, I also would put limits on it so that like you couldn't have the next party recall the judge or something. It would literally be they serve until this time is up. Say, like, I don't have any problem with the judicial one being longer than the Congress one because they're less active in the political process. So let's say the term limit for um, a Supreme Court judge was 15 or 20 years. Um, that way it's out of the that's way it's out of the hoi polloi of the political cycle, or at least insulated from it somewhat. Um, that I would define as reasonable because the idea of the the least regulated of all the branches of our government is the judicial one, and it results in things like Roe v. Wade and so on, where literally if you get a biased court in there, they can just straight up make and unmake laws as they see fit. Fuck that noise.
See, one thing that I would argue for is a some sort of civilian oversight committee for the judiciary and judges, or maybe like a ability to recall judges. Because I feel like if you have a judge in your city or community who all the people of the town believe is unjust, but they can't do anything about it, that's wrong.
Yeah, I agree. I think especially for lower courts, judge recall should be a thing. I don't know. Again, I don't know if I'm willing to extend that to the Supreme Court, just because if you extend it to the Supreme Court, then that recall procedure will be used like a politically partisan weapon. Oh, Trump elected Clarence Thomas. Let's get rid of him. Oh, um, Obama appointed or was going to appoint Merrick Garland. Let's get rid of him, and so on. Like, I don't want the one thing that makes me willing to differentiate between the legal system and the rest of Congress, or the judicial system and the rest of Congress, is because Congress is more active, they should be held more accountable, and also because the judicial system basically does um, tether the entire rule of law, they do need to be kept above the partisan hoi polloi as much as possible. So lower court judge or like local judge, yes, absolutely, judge recall should be a much more a much more open and available process. But with the Supreme Court, again, I would keep it to strictly the term limits there.
One of the things that made me think about this judge recall. I don't know if you've seen the basically saga of the Bitcoin dad versus his daughter.
I think I might have heard something about it, but I don't know much. What happened?
Well, actually, this is quite the story. So I honestly think that we could do an entire stream on this. But basically, in this story, this guy was going through a divorce with his ex-wife, who, from what he tells it, was very vindictive. Where he had agreed to, split assets and then, pay her, a certain amount of money, post divorce. And the thing is, though, she basically ruined his business by getting her lawyers to call his clients. And obviously, clients, when they're getting calls from, like their the person they're doing business with, like lawyers of their ex-wife, it spooks them, and so he lost a lot of clients and lost his business. And so then, she takes him to court. But she doesn't have a lawyer because he lost his business, so he can't afford a lawyer. And so this, like, I think she was a feminist, but like this, like, judge asks, okay, what are you going to pay her the money that you are? It's like, I can't. Like, she basically destroyed my business. Like, I would give her the money, I do not have it. And the judge just kept asking, when are you going to pay her the money? And they're like,
The
there is
money
no
I
money
don't
to
have
give.
because she fucked it over
Yeah,
deliberately.
and yeah, until the judge basically remanded him to jail and to send him to jail, and then he not only had to pay back the money that he had agreed to pay her before he lost his business, but he also had to now pay her lawyer fees. So now he has
Oh,
to pay for his own demise, essentially.
okay, we have toured the tragic roundabout of divorce court and family court many, 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 many times. Just the MRM in general, and also on this show. So I don't think anyone who ever watches this is going to disagree with me when I say this is yet another case of divorce courts being shies. Um, which speaking of the whole men's issue side of it, given that we are the duality of man, I guess we should focus on that at some point. It is interesting to me that very much the neo Hegelian um, the neo Hegelian sort of overarching framework does seem to come from a very anti-masculine, anti-man place, especially when you get into things like obviously feminism and so on. But like I think on some level it always sort of did have a anti-masculine, like very feminine way of approaching history, because the thing that makes Hegel as toxic as literally everything it's ever touched implies that it is Hegel was basically trying to post hoc rationalize all of history through the means of false dichotomies, and no one ever called him on it, and it frustrates me to no end that no one ever called him on the fact that his post hoc oversimplification of history was based on a false dichotomy. No wonder it ruins everything it touches and every iteration or derivation thereof. Like what?
Yeah. So remind me about Hegel. His reasoning was that because we exist now in these good societies, therefore everything that happened in history was clearly meant to happen and correct.
Yeah, the base, and I'm gonna oversimplify things for the sake of actually ending the stream at a reasonable time. But the basic theory of Hegel's was all of history is the friction between thesis and antithesis, between two poles, and the only way history moves forward is when those two poles synthesize with each other. Those were his three axioms: thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. And he further postulated that history is a unidirectional and moving towards a point at which all theses will have been synthesized with all antitheses, and therefore history as we know it will come to an end, and civilization will be in a like spiritually elevated utopia, more or less. Which is where you get the whole idea of things like late stage capitalism, the end of history, postmodernism, etc. Hegel was very much the one who contrived the whole concept of pre-modern, modern, and postmodern. And of course, he viewed himself and his generation as the modern phase. So therefore, anything that came after him would, of necessity, be postmodern, and therefore trending ever so more towards the end of history, where all opposition, all conflict, all poles, all contrary ideas will essentially be worked out, and all distinctions will be null.
You know, it kind when you mentioned history being unidirectional, it kind of reminded me of this. I think it was from Norm Macdonald, where he says, if you look through the history books, it would appear that the good guys won every single time. It's amazing how that just happens.
And as funny as that joke is, and God, Norm Macdonald is amazing. Um, there are explicit cases where we know that wasn't the case. For example, the fall of Rome leading into the Dark Ages, or how King James and his, demon fearing, witch burning craziness followed Queen Elizabeth I's Golden Age. Like, even in the context of Hegel's nonsense, it flabbergasts me that people accept the whole history is unidirectional and eventually we'll get to the point where there will simply be no impulses to conflict anymore. Um, because
Has
we
he?
know
Did he meet another human
explicitly
being?
when history has gone in the wrong direction and we had to fix it.
I mean, when there was no, you know, conflict between human beings, did this guy ever meet another human being?
Apparently, he was allegedly highly educated as far as like German education was available at the time. Which, I
Yes.
mean, the whole German wing of philosophy is a whole nother canard in and of itself, for which I mostly blame Hegel because a lot of German philosophy was sort of based on Hegel after him, which is why I which is why I consider him to be the ground zero of all this evil stupidity. And I don't really give it that much of a shit about his inheritors because a lot of his inheritors basically just took the basic concept and switched some buzzwords around. So instead of thesis and antithesis, it's bourgeoisie and proletariat, or it's um, race, or it's class, or what so the fuck ever. But it's all within that same post hoc rationalization of history and culture that then um, led to the idea of like eventually all of this is going to end and we'll live in a new Eden type scenario. Eventually the proletariat will rise up and the bourgeoisie will be no more and it will be agrarian and perfect. Or eventually all of science will be undone and will no longer be in an oppressive system or blah 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 blah. Like all of these dichotomies that that Hegel's inheritors came up with are just essentially plugging and playing whatever their particular focus or bugbear was into Hegel's system of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis.
Yeah, but in order to believe these things, you would have to a just have no working knowledge whatsoever of human history, and b just a complete rejection and a refusal to accept the nature of human beings.
Yep, that's Hegel. That's why literally everyone who does plug and play his shit um tends to result in horrifying authoritarian genocides every single fucking time, or at the very least, the collapse of something that otherwise is valuable. Because okay, here is the progression of the neo Hegelian wing of of philosophy. Again, I'm oversimplifying and broad stroking for the sake of not making this a 4-hour lecture. Um, Marx and Engels take Hegel's conception and focus in on economics. Then you get the bourgeoisie and proletariat instead of thesis and antithesis, and you get communism as opposed to synthesis. Um, then you have the Frankfurt School post or in and around World War One, taking the economic aspects of Marx, rediscovering or refocusing on the historical and cultural original impetus behind Hegel, fusing them together, and getting things like postmodernism, deconstructionalism, uh, post-structuralism, etc. Um, and then from there you get people applying a Hegelian lens to literally everything: history, culture, economics, science, art, etc., and so on. And that's where you get people like Dada, who believe that artistic value was a harmful delusion, and so we needed to wake each other up from it by creating literal anti-art. and the rest is sort of history. And I'm sure you can see where that mindset led into let's co opt and destroy literally everything anyone holds to be valuable in art or culture. And, from there, from there, it's basically a straight line to the SJWs and all the various strains of critical theory and social justice and interdisciplinary studies type shit. And now here we are. That's basically the last 200 or 300 years of philosophical evolution in the neo-Hegelian wing in a nutshell.
All right. Do you have any further words?
Uh, just never Hegel, not even once. Like it's not worth it. Like nothing good has ever come from Hegel, and many mountains of bad have come from Hegel. So please, for the love of God, one, I guess my first piece of advice is stop giving Marx too much credit for just taking Hegel and putting an economic skin on it. Um, and two, blame Hegel for the shit that he and his inheritors actually did wrong. I know Marxism is scarier because it has real world examples of it, but even if you get rid of all the Marxism, as long as people are still willing to entertain the Hegelian or neo Hegelian wing of philosophy, some new version of it will just come creeping back in. Pluck the weed out at the root, or we're going to be dealing with this forever. And I don't want to be dealing with this forever.
One last thing I would like to say is that things are looking rough, but they're starting to turn around, and we can beat these guys back and reclaim our country and rebuild our society into a positive force that people like to live in. But if we are going to win against these people, it's going to take eternal vigilance. Like
Yeah.
it's you are going to have to be aware of when these people are trying to creep these ideas into your schools, and especially with children, because they appear to very very much want to impose these ideas upon children.
Well, because I think because they know that if you inform someone's framework from the time that they're a child, they'll keep some version of it for basically as long as they live. But yeah, it's a really straight line when you get down to the nitty gritty. From Hegel to Marx, from Marx to Gramsci, from Gramsci to the Frankfurt School, from the Frankfurt School to social justice. Never Hegel, not even once. That's all I'm saying. Pluck it out at the root and keep it gone.
All right, buddy. I've been Mystery.
I've been Dalton Mortimer, the Authenticator, and we have been the Duality of Man. Cheers, guys.
Goodbye, everybody.